Value, Price, and Profit by Karl Marx. Part 3. Wages and Currency. On the second day of the debate, our friend Weston clothed his old assertions in new forms. He said, consequent upon a general rise in money wages, more currency will be wanted to pay the same wages. The currency being fixed, how can you pay with this fixed currency increased money wages? First, the difficulty arose from the fixed amount of commodities accruing to the working man despite his increase of money wages. Now it arises from the increased money wages despite the fixed amount of commodities. Of course, if you reject his original dogma, his secondary grievance will disappear. However, I shall show that this currency question has nothing at all to do with the subject before us. In your country, the mechanism of payments is much more perfected than in any other country of Europe. Thanks to the extent and concentration of the banking system, much less currency is wanted to circulate the same amount of values and to transact the same or a greater amount of business. For example, as far as wages are concerned, the English factory operative pays his wages weekly to the shopkeeper, who sends them weekly to the banker, who returns them weekly to the manufacturer, who again pays them away to his working men, and so forth. By this contrivance, the yearly wages of an operative, say of £52, may be paid by one single sovereign turning round every week in the same circle. Even in England, the mechanism is less perfect than in Scotland, and is not everywhere equally perfect. Therefore, we find, for example, that in some agricultural districts, much more currency is wanted to circulate a much smaller amount of values. If you cross the Channel, you will find that the money wages are much lower than in England, but that they are circulated in Germany, Italy, Switzerland, and France by a much larger amount of currency. The same sovereign will not be so quickly intercepted by the banker or returned to the industrial capitalist. And therefore, instead of one sovereign circulating £52 yearly, you want, perhaps, 3 sovereigns to circulate yearly wages to the amount of £25. Thus, by comparing continental countries with England, you will see at once that low money wages may require a much larger currency for their circulation than high money wages, and that this is, in fact, a merely technical point, quite foreign to our subject. According to the best calculations I know, the yearly income of the working class of this country may be estimated at £250 million. This immense sum is circulated by about £3 million. Suppose a rise of wages of 50% to take place. Then, instead of 3 millions of currency, 4.5 millions would be wanted. As a very considerable part of the workingman's daily expenses is laid out in silver and copper, that is to say, in mere tokens, whose relative value to gold is arbitrarily fixed by law, like that of inconvertible paper money, a rise of money wages by 50% would, in the extreme case, require an additional circulation of sovereigns, say to the amount of 1 million. 1 million, now dormant, in the shape of bullion or coin, in the cellars of the Bank of England, or of private bankers would circulate. But even the trifling expense resulting from the additional minting, or the additional wear and tear of that million, might be spared, and would actually be spared, if any friction should arise from the want of the additional currency. All of you know that the currency of this country is divided into 2 great departments. One sort, supplied by banknotes of different descriptions, is used in the transactions between dealers and dealers, and the larger payments from consumers to dealers, while another sort of currency, metallic coin, circulates in the retail trade. Although distinct, these 2 sorts of currency intermix with each other. Thus gold coin, to a very great extent, circulates even in larger payments for all the odd sums under £5. If tomorrow 4-pound notes, or 3-pound notes, or 2-pound notes were issued, the gold filling these channels of circulation would at once be driven out of them and flow into those channels where they would be needed from the increase of money wages. Thus, the additional million required by an advance of wages by 50% would be supplied without the addition of one single sovereign. The same effect might be produced, without one additional banknote, by an additional bill circulation, as was the case in Lancashire for a very considerable time. If a general rise in the rate of wages, for example, of 100%, as Citizen Weston supposed it to take place in agricultural wages, would produce a great rise in the prices of necessaries and, according to his views, require an additional amount of currency not to be procured, a general fall in wages must produce the same effect, on the same scale, in the opposite direction. Well, all of you know that the years 1858 to 1860 were the most prosperous years for the cotton industry, and that peculiarly the year 1860 stands in that respect unrivaled in the annals of commerce, while at the same time all other branches of industry were most flourishing. The wages of the cotton operatives and of all the other workingmen connected with their trade stood, in 1860, higher than ever before. The American crisis came, and those aggregate wages were suddenly reduced to about 1/4 of their former amount. This would have been in the opposite direction, a rise of 400%. If wages rise from 5 to 20, we shall say that they rise by 400%. If they fall from 20 to 5, we say that they fall by 75%. But the amount of rise in the one and the amount of fall in the other case would be the same, namely 15 shillings. This, then, was a sudden change in the rate of wages unprecedented, and at the same time extending over a number of operatives which, if we count all the operatives not only directly engaged in, but indirectly dependent upon the cotton trade, was larger by 1/2 than the number of agricultural laborers. Did the price of wheat fall? It rose from the annual average of 47 shillings 8 pence per quarter during the 3 years of 1858 to 1860 to the annual average of 55 shillings 10 pence per quarter during the 3 years 1861 to 1863. As to the currency, there were coined in the mint in 1861 8,673,323 pounds against 3,378,792 pounds in 1860. That is to say, there were coined 5,294,440 pounds more in 1861 than in 1860. It is true that the banknote circulation was in 1861 less by 1,319,000 pounds than in 1860. Take this off. There remains still a surplus of currency for the year 1861 as compared with the prosperity year 1860 to the amount of 3,975,440 pounds, or about 4 million pounds. But the bullion reserve in the Bank of England had simultaneously decreased, not quite to the same, but in an approximating proportion. Compare the year 1862 with 1842. Apart from the immense increase in the value and the amount of commodities circulated, in 1862, the capital paid in regular transactions for shares, loans, etc., for the railways in England and Wales amounted alone to 320 million pounds, a sum that would have appeared fabulous in 1842. Still, the aggregate amounts in currency in 1862 and 1842 were pretty nearly equal, and generally you will find a tendency to a progressive diminution in currency in the face of enormously increasing value, not only of commodities, but of monetary transactions generally. From our friend Weston's standpoint, this is an unsolvable riddle. Looking somewhat deeper into this matter, he would have found that, quite apart from wages, and supposing them to be fixed, the value and mass of the commodities to be circulated, and generally the amount of monetary transactions to be settled, vary daily, that the amount of banknotes issued varies daily, that the amount of payments realized without the intervention of any money by the instrumentality of bills, checks, book credits, clearinghouses varies daily, that, as far as actual metallic currency is required, the proportion between the coin in circulation and the coin in bullion in reserve or sleeping in the cellars of banks varies daily, that the amount of bullion absorbed by the national circulation and the amount being sent abroad for international circulation vary daily. He would have found that this dogma of fixed currency is a monstrous error, incompatible with our everyday movement. He would have inquired into the laws which enable a currency to adapt itself to circumstances so continually changing, instead of turning his misconception of the laws of currency into an argument against the rise of wages. You have reached the end of Value, Price, and Profit, Part 3, Wages and Currency, by Karl Marx. Click on the links at the end of this video to go to the playlist, or the next chapter if it's available. If you enjoy this content and would like to support the channel, please like and subscribe.